Hi, my name is Rob Neal. I've been an industrial member of AAC since 2006. My day job is Head of IT for Ashford Borough Council in Kent. I think the key thing to remember in one of these visits is the fact that assessors will be almost totally reliant on the learning outcomes matrix that you'll have filled in as part of the submission. So spending time to get that right is absolutely essential. So assessors will be looking for blank rows in the matrix, which is always an issue. We'll be looking for areas where perhaps you are claiming that a lot of individual modules will address specific learning outcomes. And we will be making sure that we can identify the thread that runs from your programme learning outcomes through your matrix down to the individual module specifications. Key to the process is the matrix that maps from your individual modules within your programmes through to the BCS accreditation criteria. And assessors will look at that matrix probably as a starting point for working their way through your documentation. So there are a number of issues that we often see that with a little bit of care you can address a lot of questions that will normally be raised by the assessors. First of all, make sure that when you map your modules to our accreditation criteria, you concentrate on the core modules within each programme, because we need to see details of the material that all of your students are actually exposed to. We will then check to see whether the module mapping that you've put on the matrix is actually consistent across your programmes and makes sense from a programme perspective. We will also want to make sure that all of the learning outcomes that we would expect to see are covered somewhere within the core of your programme. So it's a really good idea to check to make sure that there are no blank rows in the matrix before you send it off. Similarly, we want to see that there is decent coverage of each one of our criteria within your programme, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put a tick against each module within your degree. That will normally raise some questions from the panel who will find it difficult to see how that could possibly be the case. Remember when you are filling in the matrix that we want to see where the material is both taught and assessed within the body of the programme. Two key areas, especially from an industrialist point of view, is how the research and industrial input that you have within your department feeds through into the programmes that you're offering. So within the documentation that you supply, it's a good idea to give 2 or 3 examples of how research influences your programmes and your curriculum development, and likewise what the industrial input is to your programmes and how you've engaged with industry to try and identify their needs for the future. Legal, social, ethical and professional issues are always an area of concern for most panellists. So you need to make sure that you are truthful about where LSEPs are taught and assessed throughout the programme. You don't want to claim that they are taught and assessed everywhere, because that will be very, very difficult for you to prove. But you want to make sure that there is sufficient coverage for the panel to be comforted that all of this important material is covered within the core of your programmes. Projects are probably the area where we have most issues cropping up in an accreditation visit. From an assessor's point of view, we want to make sure that every project meets the BCS assessment criteria. So you need to familiarise yourself with those requirements very early on in the process. Make sure that when you supply your documents for the panel to look at, that you have a decent range of projects for us to look at, covering the top end, the middle and the low end of student achievement. Remember that the panel will be doing a lot of work before the visit to actually find out a little bit about your programmes and your department. So the quality of the documentary submission that you put together is really, really important. Make sure that all the information that a panellist is going to need is actually in the submission, and make sure that you're kept up to date on any areas of change within your programmes. So for example, information security, legal, social and ethical and professional issues are just 2 of the areas that are very fast moving and it's easy to omit from your programmes or the documentation that you provide. As part of the submission, you will fill in 2 forms, Part A and Part B. And it's vital that these are filled in correctly and with sufficient detail to enable us to actually get a good feel for what is going on in your department. If you look at the two parts of the accreditation form that you fill in, Part A and Part B, then you'll see that there's a very close correlation between the information that's asked for on the form and our accreditation guidelines. And what we'll be doing is working through the form, making sure that we can put a tick in the relevant column of our assessment matrix. So you need to double check that you have actually answered all of the questions that are raised by our guidelines in Part A and Part B of the form. If you have any questions either about the forms that you need to submit to us or the process that we go through either before, during or after the visit, then contact the education team and we can answer all of those questions immediately. It's far better to know what's going to be happening before the visit takes place rather than trying to address issues during it. During the visit, you'll probably feel like you're in the middle of an interrogation. That's not deliberate. It's meant to try and tease out a lot of the issues that the panellists will have identified before the visit. So one top tip, which is often overlooked, is to answer the questions that you're asked. They'll be very targeted and they won't be trying to trip you up. Even though you may have had one person filling out the documentation and being responsible for its submission, make sure that you have all relevant people in the meetings with the visiting panel. People who are responsible for particular programs or particular core modules are always valuable to have in the room because we can then get the answers to our questions immediately and not have to wait for confirmation or a follow-up. Finally, as you work your way through the accreditation process, in between visits, do advise the BCS if there are any changes to your programme that may impact on your accreditation. It's far better that we know of these things in good time because then we can work with you to maximise the benefit of your next accreditation visit.